So I spent a lot of years singing with Leo, and he always says that he never follows a program. So I suppose it shouldn't surprise you too much that I don't either. And my grandpa loved to tell stories, as everybody knows. So I'm going to tell a very short story of my own, and then I'm going to transition into the story that Steve actually wrote. So when I was really young, probably before I can actually even remember, my mom always talked about how Reverend Terry would say that people from Smithshire acted like they hadn't seen each other for a month every Sunday after church, even though, obviously, we saw each other every time. And so when I was really little, I always thought that behind that curtain was God, and we just put a curtain there so we couldn't see it. And so one day when I was pretty young, I had escaped the clutches of my parents, not during church, thankfully, and I got up there and I moved that curtain, and lo and behold, all that's back there is a wall. And so I was really disappointed. And, so then later in life, I thought, when I was in junior high, I thought, well, how silly it was that I thought God was like behind this curtain in the Smithshire United Methodist Church. I mean, of all places. And so then, now that I'm older, I'm all of 27, my students will tell you that's quite old. I realized that it really wasn't that stupid, because, God is where there is fellowship, and I found that there's pretty great fellowship here in the Smithshire United Methodist Church. All right, so here goes Steve's story. All right, so keep in mind while I'm reading this, Steve wrote it, so the stuff he's talking about happened long before I was born, but that kind of makes sense. I feel like I have a pretty good feel for what Smithshire was like in 1930. Because my grandpa told me so many stories of what it was like back then. All right, so anyway, here it goes. So this story is entitled "The Death of Peter Rabbit," a tale from Smithshire. Smithshire is a town born of a railroad from a prairie dog, less than a town, but more than a crossroads. In fact, there are no roads that cross in Smithshire, but there is a blacktop. Being from Smithshire, I'm often asked, where are the hobbits? Well, we're all akin to hobbits, but we usually wear shoes to hide our hairy feet, which I'm glad of. My shire is a great place to farm. It is truly in the middle of nowhere. From my perspective, the shire is equally accessible in any direction to anything of note to the important peoples of the world. Shire folk generally prefer any direction that leads them home. One of the most notorious characters in Smithshire in my youth was Peter Rabbit. Old Pete's notoriety did not result from some great crime. Old Pete, while not a civic leader, was an essential person in the Shire's disproportionately large assemblage of what are affectionately termed true characters. Pete had an inability to bound his actions by legal definitions. He truly seemed to live with his own ethics. Pete mostly hunted, fished, and loafed in Smithshire's favorite loafing spot, the gas station. Pete occasionally worked as a day laborer for various farmers. My father had known Rabbit, as he was often called, because he had hunted and fished as a boy. Most men of Pete's age pursued more regular forms of employment and were not down at the creek during the day. So Pete worked at our farm on many occasions and had dinner with us. Dinner is at noon, in case you are among those in our society who have been misinformed about its proper usage. People would sometimes say about Pete, he's really a smart guy. Intelligence was a somewhat unclear quality when I was a Shire boy. Intelligence was credited as a quality to the not quite normal people who were often viewed with a certain amount of suspicion or derision. Rabbit really excelled at two activities in life, drinking and petty theft. He was reputed to be good at hunting and fishing, but they seemed only corollary skills. Old Pete was usually drinking when out in the field, and hunting was done out of season, on land without permission, lacking a license or tag. The historians in the gas station said Pete once worked for the Santa Fe Railroad, a reliable employer once he had some seniority with the section gang. The story was he had lost his job over some theft. His drinking was an issue, but not a career-ending habit. It was commonly understood wisdom he should have made it to 20 years and then spend his life drinking and fishing. Our lives would have been greatly eased if we adhered to the common wisdom of others. In the time I knew Pete, he was one of our most pursued criminals. Every month or so, I would hear adults discussing Pete's eluding the hot pursuit of the police, or occasionally a conservation officer. He was reputed to be able to do the tests better drunk than most people could do them sober. He could stand on one leg and touch his nose without a miscue. This was a time before breathalyzer tests. Rabbit knew every road, lane, and travelable path in the township. He would turn down one to elude pursuit, drive out into the woods. Often he would then walk the 3 or 4 miles home and go back to get his car while hunting the next day. Pete had many a candy bar from the gas station, but may never have paid for one. Even though the owners tried to watch him after he left, they would be one candy bar short. We didn't have security cameras in those days either. If Rabbit had a candy bar, he was likely to give it to a kid. He often didn't really want food. Whiskey was his protein shake. I don't know when I learned that Peter Rabbit wasn't his real name. Garnet Wilkerson ran the telephone exchange. You turned the crank and asked Garnet to connect you. Garnet was Pete's wife, so at some point I asked about his name and learned the story. Even his first name wasn't Peter. As a boy, he and 2 others had broken into the county schoolhouse a couple miles west of town. The teacher who lived nearby caught them. She wanted to know their names. He came up with the names from the comics for his 2 companions, but when stating his own name, the only name he could think of was Peter Rabbit. So Lee Wilkerson became Peter Rabbit for the remainder of his life. Sometimes when doing day labor for a farmer, his check was written to Peter Rabbit and was cashed at the gas station without question. Even in Smithshire, youth ends and new choices come along. So at 18, I went to college. It was a public university not too far away from Smithshire, a drivable distance. We had a cow herd and needed to work with a neighbor who also had a cow herd. So after the first week of college, I came home to help get the cows from one place to another. It required tromping around the timber and some hills and some of the same places where Peter Rabbit's domain. Afterwards, as everyone was visiting around the pickup truck, someone mentioned Peter Rabbit. As I listened, I realized they weren't relating some new escapade of poaching or avoiding a DUI. They were referring to old Pete in the past tense. Peter Rabbit had died, and of course I didn't know because I was no longer wholly a part of Smithshire. I had become one of the others who were away. So the death of Peter Rabbit has always marked the point in my life that I realized I was separated from my youth and the universe I had known. It was a moment when I realized nothing lasts forever. Whether it is your own childhood or your children's appreciation of the time that you have, your lives will become separate soon enough. So that is Smithshire's version of Peter Rabbit, a time and a man not likely to ever exist again.